Okay, so the last unit that we'll cover is on the War of 1812, and we're going to look at the War of 1812 much in the same way as we've looked at other conflicts, not so much in the battles, but talking about cause and effect. Okay, so this war does not start in 1812. The causes of the war precede 1812, and it begins under the administration really of Thomas Jefferson. So under the Jefferson administration, the British had been engaging in warring with France, okay? And in their warring with France and executing a blockade on French ports, the U.S. felt like that our freedom to trade was impeded on, okay? And so the British and the French engage in something that's called impressment. What is that exactly? It is stopping American merchant ships on the high seas and stealing their ships, their merchant ships, stealing the merchandise, and enlisting American merchants into their navy, okay? So these abuses of American sovereignty, of America's right to trade, began in the early 1800s. And I'm going to pause here and talk about how Jefferson, again, displayed actions as president that really did not align with his political constitutional interpretation, because he supported embargoing, stopping trade. You know, Jefferson was a man of free trade. Well, one of his solutions for the impressment issue, he supported that Congress ban trading with Britain and France as an effort to stop the embargoing. We were having difficulty with Barbary pirates, these Moorish pirates in the Mediterranean and on the western coast of Europe near Spain, the Iberian Peninsula, and he engaged in an undeclared war. Okay, so you're circumventing the Constitution. Wars according to the Constitution are declared by Congress. Well, he engaged in several naval conflicts in the Barbary Wars under his administration, which is not so constitutional. Okay, so Jefferson convinces Congress to declare those embargoes. Now, those things hurt the U.S. economy more than it hurts European economies, because we do not have a developed manufacturing industry. And so it's going to cause the price of goods to go up here in the United States. Those few manufactured goods that we do have are going to become extremely expensive once the embargo is issued. On the flip side, though, it does encourage investors to invest in American-made manufactured goods, which in the long run will help our manufacturing industries, which again was more in line with the Hamilton vision and not very much in line with the agrarian Jeffersonian vision. So we're also dealing with another British problem. The British, their ships have maintained a presence in the Great Lakes, and in doing so, they've continued to enrich themselves with Indian trade. Okay, Indians are becoming more and more hostile to Western frontiermen and to Western settlement, and in their aggression, they're using British firearms. So a lot of Western politicians believe that we need to stand up to the British because they are arming natives against the U.S. government. We see that very clearly in Tecumseh. Okay, so Tecumseh is a Shawnee chief whose vision is he wants like a Pan-American Confederacy, like a unified native movement against America to stop their encroachment. This is probably one of the only times that Native people have attempted a large allegiance system together against the U.S. government. And Tecumseh even traveled into Alabama. And all of this was to coalesce a confederacy of natives against the U.S. government. Tecumseh and his brother's name is really hard to pronounce. In U.S. history, we just call his brother the Prophet. They headed up a revival of Indians in the heart of the North American continent. And they were really spirited and zealous about a return to their previous power. This revival comes to a swift end when William Henry Harrison, who becomes a major war hero during this War of 1812, kills Tecumseh at the Battle of Tippecanoe. And that ultimately is the beginning of the end of that native confederacy against the U.S. government. Okay, so, but it doesn't do away with the U.S. interest to stop the British from antagonizing Indians and instigating conflict on the continent. And we see that many Western state politicians like Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun. These are congressmen from states like Kentucky and Tennessee who want to declare war on Britain in 1812. And one of the reasons they want to declare war on Britain is to disband the allegiance between Indians and the British. Okay, so we've talked now about several causes of the War of 1812. So America's their rights as a sovereign nation to trade on the high seas is being impeded. Okay, and then we have the Indian issues we can determine as a cause of the War of 1812. So Jefferson wins the 1800 election and the 1804 election, and he keeps with the Washington precedent of 2 terms. And in 1808, James Madison is elected in 1808 to the presidency, another Virginian Southerner who's going to be president. Jefferson is not as likely to support a declaration of war as Madison is. So in 1812, the declaration of war does happen in 1812. Congress declares war for the very first time in 1812. They declare war against the British, and this is, some historians call this like the Second American Revolution. So Madison chooses war, and Congress will make that declaration of war in 1812. So we fight a number of naval battles. The U.S. doesn't have a well-developed navy. Britain has a stellar navy, so we are not ready at all for this conflict. And the British even execute a blockade of our Atlantic coastline. They burn our capital. Okay, so the British sack Washington, D.C. They burn the Capitol building and they burn the White House. Perhaps you guys have been told that Dolly Madison, who is the First Lady, saves the portrait of Washington from burning in the White House. And the federal leaders are like fleeing frantically Washington, D.C. as it is burning. In retaliation, U.S. troops will burn York, Canada. And then in December of 1815, Andrew Jackson, a Tennessee volunteer, has a regiment who's holding off the British in New Orleans in December of 1814, December of 1814, and then they go into January of 1815, and he wins this beautiful battle against the British in New Orleans, where he holds off the British by digging trenches. And there they have this huge navy, and he just has infantry and cavalry there in New Orleans. And from this win in New Orleans, Andrew Jackson becomes a national hero. Ironically, though, in Ghent, a treaty has already been signed to end the War of 1812. That treaty was signed in a couple of weeks before the Battle of New Orleans. The treaty was signed, but there was a lag in communication there, so that was not known. Nevertheless, Andrew Jackson is a war hero as a result. So the Treaty of Ghent is more so a simple peace agreement, armistice that agrees to end the fighting. There's not a lot that changes as far as land. There are no boundary changes with the Treaty of Ghent in 1814, excuse me. But the U.S. and the British sort of settle this long-standing score, and America stands up for its national sovereignty and identity. And then in the years after, there is a great time of its it's called the Era of Good Feelings, and we see nationalism, the power of the national government is going to grow to a large extent. We're also going to see a period of time where there's not a lot of political division. In the years following the War of 1812, we don't see any major political divisions until around 1828. The political parties start to redefine themselves, and they have varying platforms around 1828. So that is our Unit 6.